Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 best Arc Fantasy Tames. So without further ado, let's get straight into this, shall we? In at number 10 we have got the Velonaur, and I really personally think this definitely does have to make the list. It is often, in my opinion, very forgotten about, and also on top of that, it is extremely cool and useful to me, and Wildcard have never revisited this creature, at least in like making a new one that's similar to it, that uses that same ability of essentially firing darts from its body onto other creatures. And maybe, I guess, maybe you shouldn't do that because, you know, like, it would not be too differentiated from the Velonaur. Obviously the Velonaur did come out with Gen 2, but still I feel like Wildcard could explore this idea even more, or give the Velonaur some kind of TLC as well, because I do admit it is good. It is just really sad that its damage doesn't scale with its bullets, and you could really utilize that ability, which it has, even more, and get so much more use out of it and make it cooler. Obviously by adding more damage you can actually make those better, and you could do like different kinds of bullets, like you have different plate types on something like the Stego. Like you could have some that curve around walls, like, you know, a homing one. You could have ones that like set fire to things, one that freeze things. I kind of a bit Pokemon with all the different like fire, earth, but you could really get some good use out of it. Next up we have got the Gasbags, and I feel like this creature is really cool and very inventive, and as a fantasy creature it really just works for me, and I really find it such a great one. Like, I love the way it works and how it's implemented and how it moves around the map, because yes, it definitely does take quite a bit of a learning curve to actually fly these things somewhat efficiently, and in this B-roll I'm absolutely terrible at flying it. Sorry for the atrocious gameplay, you're just going to have to deal with it, I guess. Either way, they're not the easiest thing to fly, but I can see how it would ergonomically work, and nowadays I am a lot better at flying these things. This B-roll is a little bit old and I should really consider updating it. I'll probably do that in the future at some point, but you know, you still get the representation of the Gasbags and you can see how it works. Essentially you level up your oxygen, and then that will give you gas, and then the gas allows you to fly around the map, because obviously that's what you use, and it will slowly deplete as you keep going. The one kind of downside about these things is they do take full damage, and also taming them can be pretty annoying because it's pretty buggy, and you definitely do have to be careful about that full damage, as if they run out really high in the air, considering they're not too easy to control, especially in the early stages, and you'll probably be doing this more in the early stages. You go up way too high and then just simply run out, and then you'll just kind of fall to your death, or you use a lot of damage. So not a lot of damage, you use up a lot of health. What am I talking about anymore? My brain is confuzzled again, like it was in yesterday's video. Either way, yeah, you don't want to do that. Obviously if you do end up in that, you can simply just dismount just before you hit the ground, and it's not really that much of an issue. The only real issue then is just getting out and away from all of those pesky creatures which lie, you know, just on the ground. Obviously the Wyvern isn't a ground creature, but there was a lot of corrupted Wyverns down there, and then I ended up just going way too high to the top of the map. So it really just show you definitely got to be careful with these things, but I really think they're cool and I love the way they're implemented. Next up we have got the Crystal Wyvern, and this creature is here just because it kind of expands on what the Wyvern does, and in my opinion it just does it better. Its taming method is so much easier in my opinion, and a lot more simple. I know it is locked behind a level 65 level like wall. Essentially you've got to get to level 65 to be able to tame this thing, and you do need the primal crystal, so you need to knock out one of these Wyverns to actually get that primal crystal. But doing a note run isn't that bad, and knocking one of these things out can be very simply done with a pretty relatively inexpensive trap and some tracking arrows and a crossbow, or you could even just use a bow, but you know, you'll probably have a crossbow by the time you tame one of these things, and they're just so good, and you get pretty much the full Wyvern experience, which I'm confident is the same really. Obviously it's different because it's different style of Wyvern. You get the hydration buff on these things, seemingly a little bit kind of useless considering it's a flyer and they can't go in the water, but still you do have that. And with that Blood Crystal Wyvern, it just, their main ability is so cool and so useful and so effective. But people really do like this just normal Tropical Crystal Wyvern, I think it's called, something like that. Not really too familiar with the naming of these things. I usually just call them the Crystal Wyverns. But yes, they, in my opinion, are definitely very deserving of being in the list, and I just simply had to put them here, as I really do enjoy having these things on my side and taming them. They are just a dream to have. Next up, we have got the Snow Owl, and this creature is here just because of how full it is with all of those abilities, and you really can't let it down for all of those. It just packs so much in terms of all of its great abilities. It has to be on this list, and it also just becomes sort of a better version of the Griffin in my opinion. Although yes, maybe not as speedy. I will give the Griffin a brief mention. It's not on the list. It definitely could be worthy of being on the list, and I might be tempted to switch out the Velonaur or something like that, or maybe put it instead of the Snow Owl. It really just depends on personal preference, and for me, everything that the Snow Owl does, I feel like, you know, the Griffin does, but like not as well, maybe in terms of obviously the speed. It's faster, but I just prefer this creature because it's a bit of an all-rounder for me. It's got that glide ability, so you can pick up the speed. On top of that, it's also got a heat-seeking ability, more useful for PvP players, as you can see if any people are trying to raid your base, or if you've trying to find someone, you know, if they have raided your base, or if they've been trying to, then you can quickly track them down like that. And obviously if you're trying to find any small creatures or just creatures that are lost in PvE, works as well, and it works quite well as a sort of night vision camera as well. And also on top of that, they do heal up creatures as well with their freezing ability. Don't know how many times I've said as well, probably far too many. Either way, you can freeze those creatures up, and then from that, obviously, it's going to heal them, and it can be any type of creature, enemy creatures, your own creatures, or wild creatures. And wild creatures, it kind of adds a new dimension to healing creatures, which the Den doesn't have, which is if you're taming something, and then, you know, you've put loads of tranks into it, and it's really low on health, then you can just quickly heal it up with one of these things, and obviously it's going to freeze it, so it can't deal any damage back to you. Also, on top of this, they do give off Snow Owl pellets, which if you feed them to gachas, you are going to get yourself some really, really great loot. And I know it has been nerfed since release, but it is still definitely worth doing. And there's just so much you can get and do out of the Snow Owl, especially considering how easy these things are to tame. And the saddle is like completely inexpensive. It's just so easy and nice to get one of these things, and you can just get so much use out of them. They really are worthy of being on the list. Next up on the list, we have got the Astrodelphis, and this creature just travels at such great speed, and I get so much use out of that speed that I really have to put this thing on here. And the Rhyniognatha really does come in handy as well, but that's not really a fantasy creature, so I can't put that thing here. Obviously, it's just not going to be on the list because it was a real thing. Not is, because it's not alive anymore. It has gone extinct. Either way, this creature can really rack up tons of speed, and although maybe not the friendliest tame on the surface, you are going to be taming this thing more late game, maybe mid game. Like Gen 2 is quite an easy map, so your perspective of things does get changed, but that saddle level being in the like 100 teens, I think it is, around, you know, that is quite a huge requirement for the saddle of this thing. But you know, I don't mind that too much, especially just you can really get a lot of use out of this thing. And if you also want to just get good at flying these things, you can always just do the missions, and you don't actually need one yourself. So then when you do actually tame one, you can already just be a perfect flyer of these things. I don't know why, but that's just what I did, because I wanted to be able to fly these things well, and I kind of knew there'd be a little bit of a challenge, at least at the start. That's just generally how I am with new creatures like this. I hadn't really used a Rhyniognatha as much back then, and I was just like, right, I'm just going to learn from this. Kind of did the Maewing a bit like that as well, although they are just tamed so early on, you know, you really don't have to struggle with getting those things to tame. In at number 5, we've got the Rock Drake, but I'm also going to kind of put it as a duo set of creatures, and I'm going to put the Maewing here as well, as that is a tremendously great glider, capable of so much speed. It also acts as a portable feeding trough, and you can grab the berries too and glide along the surface of the water, and it's a pretty good swimmer as well, and it definitely should not be underrated for that. And now talking about the Rock Drake, it is a really great glider. I think it was the kind of the first one introduced to Ark, and it packs so much damage, and it is your only real source of travel on a map like Arboration. And I really enjoy how this creature just generally flies around the map. Obviously it doesn't fly, but still, like, you know, this creature is just, it's so elegant in how it was designed, and you can tell Wildcard put a lot of thought into this thing. It really does fit into the map. It's just generally got a really cool model design. It looks really cool, and taming it although is pretty much just the same as the Wyvern tame. You go get the egg, not from a trench, but just from a general nesting area down in the red zone, I think it's called. And then, yeah, from there you get the rock drake egg, and then you get out and then use air conditioners to do it. You're not going to really need, or not really going to want to use campfires, because you need such a specific temperature. It's not even worth doing it. Not even sure if it really can be done with campfires, because I can't remember if it's a really low temperature or a really high temperature. Probably high considering it's incubation, but you never know with these things, and once you play loads of weird wacky mods, you're going to get some very weird incubation temperatures for things. Either way, they are particularly harsh on things like the rock drake, so use air conditioners, because then obviously that egg is not going to fail to hatch really, as long as you've got enough, and yeah, you're going to be perfectly fine. Next up, we have got the Desmodus, and this creature is here because it has Sanguine Elixir. It is a blood bag farm, and it is just capable of doing so much. It's a glider as well, and personally I do think it glides even better something like the Snow Owl, and you can really tell it is an extremely high quality creature because of those animations. And I know it's not really going to affect how these things actually handle, because they already handle tremendously, but it really just show that Wildcard put quite a lot of effort into this creature, and the creatures just keep getting higher and higher quality as they're introduced into the game, and it is really nice to see all of these cool changes, and that is just why they are such nice creatures to use, and I really enjoy having creatures like this. It just makes my day, and having a creature as good as this, which can also gather blood bags and get to one of my favourite tames, which is the Bloodstalker, so I can tame more of those things as well. It's a really nice thing to have, and obviously that Sanguine Elixir does a third of the tame like that with a click of a button, and that gliding ability is nice. They can also go invisible at night as well, but I was in the Wastelands biome, so I couldn't show that to you. In at number 3, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is here just because it really is like sort of an epitome of a style of creature, which is sort of where the Thyla is in a way, and it just does everything the Thyla does, but better. Obviously it can't really climb walls or vertical surfaces, but it can jump to immense heights, which the Thyla can't, so it can still get that sort of range and get up things quite easily. And also on top of that, does not have the bleed ability, which is other downside. Sounded like I was going to say compliment there. I kind of was, and then I decided to mention that. Either way, these things do have the hydration buff, which the Thylas don't. On top of that, they do have the pack buff, which Thylas don't as well. And another actually downside, I know these are number 3 in the list, I'm still talking about downsides, is the taming methods, because it's god awful and I hate it. But they're really good swimmers in the water, capable of so much damage. They have such high mobility in packs. They can go invisible and do all kinds of crazy stuff like that. Obviously they get the pack buff, and they deal so much damage. They're such nice creatures to use and handle. They had to be on the list. In at number 2, we have got the Rhyniognatha, and although my opinions aren't the best on this creature, I do admit it is a fan favourite of many, and that is why it has been pushed up into the number 2 spot. Personally, it wouldn't have really been on the list for me, as I find it is way too OP, but that can't really demote it for being such a great fantasy creature, and you can get so much use out of this thing. I did have to put it way up high in this list, as I do admit it is definitely nice to have sometimes. And when thinking about it, it can just pick up such a wide range of creatures like Rexus and Paraceratherians, which really didn't seem possible back in the early days of Arcanite. It's nice to see that sort of progression. Again, does feel a bit off that I can pick up creatures of that size, but it definitely does come in real handy, especially in ASA, considering cryopods aren't out at the moment, and they probably won't be here until extinction releases, or the community might sway the devs to add them in a little bit earlier, as it is quite an inconvenience to say the least. Also, these things deal tons of damage as well, and they have some really cool abilities, very nice animations, and the model is packed full of detail as well. The tame method is pretty much just ripped from the Reaper, and I do have a taming guide, so if I remember, I'll leave a card up there, and also you can just search it if I actually do forget, if you're wondering how to tame one. But you know, you probably do know how to tame one by now. They have been out for quite a while, and obviously they're maybe not the most difficult to tame, and people do make them out for being quite difficult. But if you have a net launcher or some kind of simple trap, and you have something which is capable of doing quite a lot of damage, and you do have something like the magnifying glass, or on ASA you can just download the awesome Spyglass mod, as mod accessible to everyone, and obviously you got yourself a Bronto. You don't really need all of those resources, because I don't know why you'd want 100% effectiveness for this thing. It's not really a boss creature. It's not going to make too much difference, really, at least from my use of it. It's not actually too bad to tame. But just before we get into number 1, I do have to mention a few creatures, which are the Noglin, because I think that thing is just really cool, really nicely implemented. I also want to mention the Bloodstalker, my favourite underwater tame, but it didn't really make the list because it's not maybe the most popular for everyone out there, and there are just so many other creatures which I still want to put on their list. The Astrodelphis is another really great shout as well. The Void Worm, often forgotten about, do really like that creature as well. So without further ado, let's get into the number 1 spot. And in at number 1, we have got the Reaper, and this creature is here just because it fits in so well with its map, and although maybe not the most inventive design for a creature, pretty much just the alien from Aliens, or Aliens, depending on what film you're watching, or it could even be Aliens 3, who knows, just that one, the Xenomorph. I think it's like kind of code name in the general arc, like code where you spawn it in, is like Xenomorph thing, something like that. It's definitely not the Reaper, because it's not called that. Some people might think of the what is it called? The Grim Reaper, if you say Reaper. But in Ark, obviously, it's just a Xenomorph thing. It's capable of doing so much damage as well. You feel like an absolute god when using it, and you can slow down creatures with its tail attack too. On top of that as well, it was the first to introduce that really cool taming method, where it impregnates you once you get it to a low enough amount of health, and then you keep its pheromones, and then you use its pheromones to actually stop it from... then stop the baby once it's born from killing you, and obviously while it's still inside you, you get loads of XP to get that thing up to 100% effectiveness. Really nice progression, and it really feels like you do have to work for this creature, but it really feels like it is all worth it in the end. And their model design is so perfect, and they really do fit into the map tremendously well. And I just really like the progression of these things. And with the R-Reapers on Gen 2, they're ridiculously easy to tame. So if you've never tamed one before, maybe start there first. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members. And if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.